The Nova Guest List Podcast.
With Kieran McGuinness.
The very best in indie, alternative and homegrown music from the seriously addictive Radio Nova.
That is The Pills by Def Nettle on Radio Nova. Big fan of that tune. That came in last year and I was like, what is this? This is excellent. Well, it's by a man called Glen Brady and his band. He's a kind of a producer, a DJ, songwriter, and he has such an amazing kind of story of where he got to where he is now. And he's releasing a new album next Friday called DN01, which is the first Def Nettle album, and it's absolutely great. It's a kind of a mix of punk and hip-hop, a kind of an alternative feel, a bit of trip-hop on there as well. And we're very, very lucky, ahead of the album release, to chat to Glen on the phone. How's it going, Glen?
Good, thanks, Kieran. That's a good description. The album is DN001.
Okay.
So you know.
D001. All right. DN001.
I'm planning multiple albums.
Yeah,
so,
you need to get to 100.
Start with the, yes.
So the album's coming out next Friday. I'm assuming, I don't know about you, I've got an album coming out next Friday as well. I've kind of given it to a lot of my friends for kind of opinions and whatever else. What kind of feedback are you getting back from people about it?
Really good so far. We've done 5 or 6 singles over the last 18 months or so. So half of the album has those singles on it, and there's been a good reaction. It's got lots of radio play and lots of interviews and stuff like that around it. I think people were initially, because I come from a production, engineering, and DJ background. They're probably surprised to hear the vocals. But, it's something I've been working on my whole life. And, I spent many years away in New York and Berlin and places like that where I've done a lot of vocals. So kind of developed it over many years before I decided to go full on with it.
Yeah, well, it's fair play, because the vocals are, they have a lot of personality. They have a unique kind of style, as you can hear from the song. So, I don't know whether you've come out of the traps with it, but it's already kind of very formed, But you do mention a bit of your background there. It's kind of an amazing background getting to now. Like, it's been a kind of a trip. So, how do you feel like all this has kind of informed the album?
I think it's really important. I think, like you said, I kind of, I grew up between New York and Dublin. And then, in my 20s, I was a DJ in Dublin and, kind of outgrew that a little bit and went to New York and so on, San Francisco and Berlin. And, I kind of followed the music and followed the work in my life. So each place has a very important influence on the album. A lot of my early DJing comes out in the vocals and some of the rap style deliveries. Maybe my earlier years, there's a lot of indie and punk influence. I think I reignited my interest in that in my years in New York. And again, when I lived in San Francisco years later, I was engineering a lot of live venues there, so a lot of rock bands and whatnot. So every place has a definite impact on the production and the writing, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that people might know about you is the last band you were in had Dolores O'Riordan in it and Andy Rourke from the Smiths. I would say some people's kind of a dream band. Very sad that the two have left us, but it must have just been one of the most amazing experiences.
Yeah, I'd known Andy for many years. He had remixed some of the work I've done as DJ Wool in a band I was in, The Glass. And I remixed the precursor to the dark band that he did with Dolores was called Jet Lag. And I had remixed that band. So years later, when he and Dolores' partner were putting together the dark album, they were looking for an engineer and someone who kind of got it. And, I guess my name came up and they asked me. So I was, it was wonderful because I wasn't part of the band in the making of the album. I was the engineer and I was the mixer. And later when they decided to make a live version of the band, that's when I ended up being in the live band itself. What can I say? Working, Andy, the Smiths, this was probably the most important band of my teenage years and the most influential band maybe in my whole life. So I was always a little awestruck being around Andy, even though he was a very down-to-earth person. It always felt like I was really privileged to be around Andy, especially when there was music making involved, as opposed to just socially. As far as Dolores is concerned, that's just magic, really. She was a one-of-a-kind person and a one-of-a-kind singer. So, I'm almost emotional thinking about how lucky I was to have had any interaction with her, never mind to have, made a record with her and for her, and to have worked for her. It was probably the greatest experience you could have as a producer, engineer, or writer, or musician, or an artist in general. Just to listen to her voice, but also to work with her as a person. She was a very maternal and honest and interesting person to be around.
Yeah, I'd say it was incredible, all right, and what a privilege.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I'm really lucky.
On the album itself, on DN001, Andy Rook plays on the final track, War Machine. But let's talk about the album. For me, it's really sonically interesting. I mean, I know that I can hear an engineer's influence on it. It's really rhythmically.
Okay.
It's really rhythmically driven. So the beats, the delivery, the vocals, the way that the kind of songs come together. There's a lot of rhythm in there, so people are really going to enjoy that, listen to it. And I think one of the things there's a lot of personality and tongue in cheek in the lyrics right from the first song. So I think, did the album come together as a plan that you knew it was going to be, or were you just piecing things together as it went, and then it fell where it fell, and you kind of...
Initially, I was working for a rapper in the States, and we were trying to figure out what his album was going to be. And one of his ideas was a very jazzy idea, and one of his ideas was kind of a punky idea. And he ended up going for the jazzy album. That's a long story. And I ended up having these 2 or 3 tracks I really liked, and that became The Pills and I think Don't. Those 2 tracks were from that original project. And I just felt like I'd been writing my whole life, and it was time to do something with that. And, I've always had a bit of a voice and something to say. So once I had those 2 tracks done, I kind of felt like, oh, there's a project here. Yeah, I want to do an album. And, pivotal was having Lisa involved, who is a co-vocalist on the album, Lisa Doyle. I had worked with her in a band called Third Eye Surfers back in the early 2000s, and I'd always wanted to revisit working with her, and we'd reconnected around that time. So her personality was important. But yeah, once I had those first 2 tracks done, I was like, okay, I think I have a project here, even though I wasn't particularly planning one. And I kind of felt like I owed it to myself to give the writing a chance, because I have hundreds in notebooks in closets my whole life of writing that I wanted to use. And, harking back to our conversation about traveling, I felt like, having experienced several different music scenes over the years, I had a lot of characters and a lot of people and experiences to write about. So it was the perfect vehicle for using all of that. The style of music to kind of lent itself to that. I'm a big Tom Waits fan. I like lyrics. I like the idea of the writer, and I really wanted to somehow use that in the music. So this was a great way to do that.
Well, look at we're chatting to Glen Brady and his band Def Nettle have their debut album DN001 out on Friday, and they're playing in Whelan's on Thursday night. Tickets are £10. It's going to be a brilliant gig. Go along and see that. Yeah. So just before we go, I'm going to play one more track from the album. I think this is one of my favourite songs. I guess there's a couple of different personalities on the album, but this is a sort of one of the kind of more soulful sides of things. It's called 4 Years. And just very briefly, Glenn, can you give us a little background on the song 4 Years by Def Nettle?
Yeah, 4 years kind of focuses in on the 4 years. It's been 5 years now, but I wrote it a year ago. The 4 years I'd been sober, and to the events that kind of inspired me to go sober. An ex of mine got murdered in the States, sadly, and that kind of inspired me to live my life with a little more presence and a little more direction, and to sober up and kind of appreciate where I was at, and to, especially with regards to music, and not take it for granted, all the stuff I've been given as a musician and an artist. So that was written 4 years after I went sober after that tragic event, and I felt like it was really important for the album to discuss that on the album, because it was so important to the making of the record.
Well, I mean, there's
also,
I was just going to say, I mean, there's 1,000 stories about it. Sounds like just such an amazing kind of a path to now. But now is the album DN001. Glenn, thank you so much for chatting to us.
Thanks. I just wanted to say we have excellent punk band The Nil supporting us on Thursday at Whelan's, so try to come down.
Nils, okay, brilliant. So it's a great lineup on Thursday night in Whelan's, and go and pick up the album DN001. And I'm assuming you'll have vinyl or albums or whatever on the night as well. Yeah,
we've got vinyl, digital, in the shops, on Bandcamp, stream it on all the platforms. There you go.
That's it. That's the plug. We got it. 4 Years is the song from the brilliant album DN001, and this is Def Nettle. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Kieran.
The Nova Guest List Podcast with Kieran McGuinness. The very best in indie, alternative and homegrown music from the seriously addictive Radio Nova.